we got a couple of things to throw in here and there, but you know, we joked at the beginning, just saying like, what happened in April? There,
Holy
again,
shit.
we think that are most important, the things that are the most compelling, and the things that are most interesting. So, April 2026, this is your monthly
Monthly Docket.
docket.
Welcome to the Republic Podcast, where history meets scrutiny and facts matter. Join Rob and Lou as they dive deep into the foundations of American democracy, dissect the laws that shape our lives, and challenge the narratives behind today's headlines. From forgotten chapters in the U.S. history to the legal truths they didn't teach you in school. This is your front row seat to get informed, unapologetic conversation. We have an American republic, if we can keep it. Now, let's get started. And we're back. Here you go. So, welcome to the Republic, If You Can Keep It podcast.
If you can keep it.
And here we are for our second installment of the monthly docket covering April 2026.
The monthly docket.
And
Lou, has anything happened in April of 2026?
well, let's see. Just to let you know, I just grabbed a whole bottle here because this is going to be something that we're going to be doing. Let's see. I don't know what did happen. So just to give you all the rundown, some of the things that we have discussed that we'll be discussing this month. So, of course, we got, as we broke it down last time, we're going with starting off with the order of the different branches. We're going to start out with the executive branch, and we're going to discuss, of course, what else is on there but Iran. And we'll discuss some of the issues and some of the changes there. Next thing from there, we're going to go into the legislative branch, and we're going to be covering. Rob's going to take and discuss some of the issues regarding the FISA warrants. What is a FISA warrant? That's a good question. Glad you asked it. Well, you're going to learn about it.
That's right.
Next, we'll be covering from there gerrymandering. What the hell is gerrymandering? Why are we covering it? And if anybody hasn't heard, well, you're going to get a good education on that. From there, we're going to briefly discuss some of the issues regarding geofence warrants that were argued before the Supreme Court. And lastly, Rob's going to take you on the journey of birthright citizenship. So, does that pretty much cover it?
We got a couple of things to throw in here and there, but we joked at the beginning, just saying like, what happened in April?
Holy
again,
shit.
We've said it before on this podcast. We'll say it again. We know it's a podcast. We don't have, and we're not going to bore you with, a 5-hour recitation of blah, 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 blah. We're trying to squeeze it into that sweet spot that's, an hour or less and hit the high, I don't know about high notes, but at least the ones that we think that are most important, the things that are the most compelling, and the things that are most interesting. April 2026, this is your monthly docket.
And for anyone that's wondering, of course, Rob and I were talking about it already, that as we're recording this, my Sabres are in the playoffs, NHL playoffs for the first time in 11, 12 years. And we're on our way, so I'm sporting it. Anyway, I don't have a Sabres hat, but I got the shirt. So
you got to represent.
Got to represent. So anyway, let's get going.
And before we do,
yes.
Remember, everyone out there, we appreciate all the listeners, the watchers, the subscribers. You've been great. Please keep sharing, hit that like button, and get the notifications when we're going to upload things. It does the algorithm a solid for us. And we appreciate your time. We appreciate your participation.
Right. And keep those comments coming. We love reading them. As you see that we did this because we got the comments. Before we get going as well.
That's exactly
one thing that we do have to discuss on a serious note here. And we'll discuss it more at the end here because it's that serious, is the attempted assassination of the president. Rather than getting into that now, because we were discussing whether or not we want to lead off with that or not, we're going to save that for the end. Just briefly, discussion and debate have to be open. that we have to be able to talk and we can't demonize one another simply because you disagree. That being said, we'll follow that up at the end. So, any comments on that, Rob, before we get going?
We have, we were going to do it anyway, but at the end of our monthly dockets, because we're lawyers, we call it the monthly docket. We were going to finish off our monthly dockets with the closing statement, as we're going to call it, the closing statement. So
Right.
today's closing statement are going to be our 2 cents with regard to the lovely public discourse we have in this country, or lack thereof.
Right. So stick around for that. Or
Mhm.
if you're watching the shorts, other things to do, please check out our YouTube page where we have not just our podcast and the shorts, but we have it broken down into our Constitution 101 discussing the issues, where everything that we discuss here will be broken down to its own separate segment. So if you want to just refresh yourself on something, instead of sitting through the entire podcast, you could watch that. But we want you here for the podcast. So, first off, the executive branch. What do we have with the executive branch this month?
It
So,
is the continuation of the Iran conflict.
right.
And for those of you who have not looked or seen our special edition that we did about the War Powers Act, about the executive utilization of military forces, as Lou said, go back to the YouTube page. You can find it, watch it, learn it, live it, love it.
Yeah.
Um,
Everything
but
that we discussed still applies.
but here we are, and the hostility started, I believe, February 28th. So we're
Mhm.
60 days out. There have been reports of, at least at one point in time, some negotiations which didn't last long. There were reports of a second round of negotiations which doesn't seem to have gotten off the ground at all. Um, I think everyone can understand and appreciate the fact, I hope, um, that most of the Iranian hardware, aside from drones and small boats and things like that, but the large hardware, missile launchers, missile sites, large boats, their air force has been relatively decimated at this point. And people are whining, complaining, screaming, protesting, whatever. And they're saying, President Trump said he wasn't going to get us into another war. He was going to do this. And we're going to invoke the War Powers Act. For those of you who didn't see it, or just as a refresher, if Congress does vote to invoke the War Powers Act, they can tell the president to stop affirmative military actions. But the statute says that after such a vote, if it should come to pass, he still has 30 days before any cessation pursuant to that congressional order. I know that Lou and I, we chatted about it before going on air. No offense to people who would want to invoke the War Powers Act. I think you do more harm than good in doing it. But Lou, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, thanks, Rob. I agree. I mean, I think it's something as we were discussing off air, before we got out, before we started recording, that the War Powers Act invocation of it and passing of it, while it may achieve a short-term goal of, okay, we're going to stop the offensive actions. It's actually, if you want to resolve matters peacefully, is actually antithetical and and is going to completely against that, because what it will now encourage, I mean, at least in my, and this is again my estimation and my reading of the facts and talking to people still in, still in the system, still in the military, still, having their giving me the pulse of what's going on, that gets enacted within that 30 days. That means you're going to now have, where Iran's whole system has been wait and see. They waited out the Russians. They waited out everybody. They will just wait out everybody because that's what their game plan is. They're patient. They don't care if their people are suffering. They will do what they want and they will wait out till the end.
They've
If
already
they're
killed
what
20 or 30,000 of them last month.
right,
What do they care?
right. So what they're going to do is they're going to say 30 days. We could wait 30 days, at which point now that gives President Trump, I've got to achieve everything I want within 30 days, which means, based upon what I've heard and the information I've read, is that means that you will see forces going back in, missile launches going back, happening again, air sorties and strikes going back in, because what they want to do is they want to level whatever they can. And you're going to see them go in and try and make sure that there's no ability to have any type of nuclear development. And the only way that they're going to do that now is not going to be through negotiations, is going to be just blowing shit up. What you have is, then people are saying, oh, well, the blockade, because as we've talked about, or as you've seen in the news, we've set up a blockade. That blockade is meant to stop resources going into Iran and their ability to export oil. And so by that, they're losing something like $400 million a day by the inability to export any oil or any goods out of Iran, as well as to bring goods in. What that means is that the War Powers Act isn't going to change that. That means that the Department of War could just say, oh, your strike group, this is your new station. This is where you will be. Instead of carrying out operations here, this is where you're going to be sitting. That the embargo will still, the blockade will still go on. That's just, that's my nutshell on it. But I may be completely wrong. Hopefully, we all pray for a peaceful resolution. Nobody wants to see anybody put in harm's way, but that's not our decision. This isn't something that we can decide at this point. We've done what we can. We're hoping for negotiations, but honestly, I haven't been overseas and been dealing with some of the people over there. I don't see it. I don't see that happening. But that's that's our discussion.
Yeah, and we'll see what comes of any vote under the War Powers Act.
Right. They've had
And
3 already.
obviously whatever comes down the pike is going to be in the May 2026 monthly docket.
Right.
So keep tuned.
Keep tuned.
Keep tuned. A time in which, like we said in our special report, the War Powers Act has been on the books since 1973. And despite all of the military interjections, actions that have been put into play since 1973 by the United States government, not once has it even been. I can't remember a time in my lifetime, and I'm an
War
old fart.
Powers Act has never been
It's never been brought up,
right?
And now we're gonna have votes on it. So interesting times.
Yes.
But I'll leave it at that.
So, moving on. Now we have Article 2, Legislative Branch. So,
And when we talk about the legislative branch, we usually talk about Congress, but we're take the legislative branch, and when there's something that is so much in the news from a state and a state legislative action, that's going to be part of the docket. And in April of 2026, tension seemingly every day was shown on the Commonwealth of Virginia.
yes.
Governor Spanberger came in as a Democrat, saying that she was a moderate. The Democrats also took both houses, both chambers in the Commonwealth's legislature. And then there were some very, very strong and pointed bills that were attempted to be rushed through. One of them has to do with a phrase called gerrymandering. And it's not gerrymandering like Mr. Mandering. Your first name is Jerry.
But there's a funny story about how that all became.
Well, I'm going to leave that story in the gerrymandering to Lou. Go with it. Run with it.
Thanks, Rob. So gerrymandering. Everybody's heard about it, but really what is gerrymandering is? What is it? So the history lesson here for today. Gerrymandering was first
Every
named.
day is kindergarten.
Every day is kindergarten, especially when you're dealing with me, because I like glue.
Sorry.
But so gerrymandering, where does it come about? Where did this term gerrymandering come about? So it came about in 1812, the first time by, it was Governor Ebridge Gerry out of Massachusetts. And what he did is that he decided to redistrict the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And how did he do that? Well,
How
he
did he
broke it
do
up.
it?
How did he do it? He broke it up in a bunch of different ways based upon his political whim, and designed one that was, back at that time, shaped like a salamander. So what they during the press there, and the people started lambasting him, saying, look, he is redesigning the voting map, and so this is Jerry's salamander, and it became gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering.
And the phrase stuck. So what is gerrymandering? Gerrymandering is the way in which states decide on how they redesign their voting districts. And this one for Virginia, there's a whole history behind it, but we'll go to the most recent one. Back in 2020, you had Virginia passed not just a statute, but a constitutional amendment where it
To
said
their state constitution.
the state constitution, yes, Virginia's Commonwealth's constitution, that they passed a constitutional amendment, and they said that the redistricting could only occur every 10 years after a census was done, and it was that it would be solely done by this redistricting committee, where before you would have the legislature get involved in it, and they would cut it up based upon basically political whims, based upon whatever the party in power wanted at the time. And to try and make this apolitical, that they created this redistricting committee by a constitutional amendment. And so it took politics out of it. But wait, did it?
Did it really?
As we all know, elections have consequences. So in the most recent election, that you had Governor Spanberger decide that they didn't like this, because they saw what was going on in Texas. They saw what was going on around in California and in other states. And so they decided
other gerrymandering efforts.
Right. That Texas, and it all started out with Texas, which we'll get to in a second, where Texas basically redistricted themselves and designed it so to give the Republicans a distinct advantage within the state. Whether or not you agree with it or not, whether or not, I could say as a conservative Republican, which, come at me if you want, but that's who I am, that yes, that it's helpful for the Republican Party, but as far as looking for what's good for the country, breaking it up that way isn't good. I don't believe in gerrymandering simply to achieve a political goal. That it should be done based upon the census and based upon the changes of the population within the state. Regardless, that's not up to Lou or Rob or any of us here. It was up to Texas, and they did it. They started it first and redistricted. And that was challenged. And the Supreme Court actually came down with a decision, which we'll be discussing shortly, where they actually upheld the redistricting and shot down a lower court, a circuit court's decision holding up the redistricting until after the elections. So what do we have here? So in Virginia, what happened is they ended up pushing through basically a new amendment where they realized that they could not revoke a constitutional amendment, or to do that would have been extraordinary. So they phrased it in a way where they amended the recently passed amendment. And the language that they use is that they included inside there, that we will allow for the next 5 years the ability to redistrict outside the decade, every 10 years, the decennial period, in order to ensure fair governance or ensure fairness. And that's the phrase that is the most important thing here. And the
If I can stop you right there for a second, Lou.
Yeah.
Now, for people who don't know, and I've been watching this throughout the month, Virginia is relatively a purple state. It's not red nor blue. It's a hybrid, and it shows in the last electoral college election, last presidential election. I think there are 10 different districts, or 11. I think
11.
There were 6 that went Democrat and 5 Republican, or what others. It was just even. And the way that every rendering that I've seen with this gerrymandering effort would have made it 10-1 in favor of the Democrats,
Right.
supposedly.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Exactly. So, so the map was redrawn back in 2020, and it created the districts where it's basically a 6-5 type of thing. 6 favoring the Democrats. 6 favoring, it was actually 6 favoring Democrats, 5 favoring Republicans. So the Democrats already had a distinct advantage there. What this new map does, based upon the referendum that was put forward, well, I'll have to be clear on this, that the referendum did not approve the map as proposed. It approved the constitutional amendment. And the key language, like I said before, is that it is redistricting process, that it was adopt new congressional districts, so it doesn't affect the state elections, which is significant as well, but creates new congressional districts to restore fairness in the upcoming elections. So that is, so you have it specifically pointed for just the next congressional and presidential elections coming up. Not anything else, just these 2 specific elections, which has a significant issue. So anyway, it went for a referendum that the voters in Virginia passed the referendum by a narrow vote. I think that the final tally, because at one point it was like a 50.1 to 48.2 to somewhere along those lines. And it was razor thin. Out of 3 million votes that came in, it came down to a vote like 90,000 votes, less than 90,000 votes. In counting them, that's significant. So what ended up happening is that the Republican Party, the Republican National Committee, previously filed lawsuit within the state of Virginia. And then you had different rulings on the trial court level, where you had judges that were granting injunctions and not granting injunctions. And the Supreme Court of Virginia stepped in and said, hold it. We are going to allow this election. We are going to allow this vote to go forward, because the whole thing was whether or not the vote should even go forward based upon procedural rules. And the Supreme Court of Virginia said, hold off. We're going to allow this referendum to go forward. And then after the referendum goes forward, then we're going to decide. And it was sort of pragmatic, where they were going to say, okay, look, if the referendum didn't pass, then RNC, your point, then it's a moot point because it didn't pass. And then it would be up to now the Democrats to say that, find some claim saying that the voting process was invalid. Regardless, it passes. So now we're in court, and you had one of the judges that was holding off his decision, because he was directed to hold it off until after the referendum. As soon as the referendum was finalized and certified, he came in and said, okay, nope, I'm not going to allow this to go forward. We're not going to allow the voting to be certified. We're not going to allow the redistricting to begin because of these grounds. One of the things that's important is that it was decided not on 14th Amendment issues, which most claims come up under, but it came up under procedural state constitutional and state legislative procedural issues, which is a significant issue. And the reason why is, going back to the Texas vote and the Texas redistricting and gerrymandering, that back in 2024, the Supreme Court took up a similar case. It was, Alexander versus South Carolina State Conference of NAACP. That was one where the Supreme Court took up a South Carolina redistricting, and it was challenged by the NAACP, saying that the way that it was designed, that it was broken up, it was racially divided, and it was it disparately affected minority voters. And Supreme Court came back in that and said, well, look, that first off, we're going to hold, if you're going to challenge this under a racial basis, we're holding it to a strict scrutiny level, which means that you as a plaintiff suing have to show above and beyond, and that we will give a presumption of validity to the legislative process, which means that if you're going to challenge it on racial grounds, you have a high bar to meet. And they said that and reaffirmed, as they have in almost every other gerrymandering case that's ever come up before the Supreme Court, gerrymandering is a legislative and a legislative animal, and is left up to the legislative branch, and that except for extreme bias cases based upon racial or other prohibited classes, we will allow it. There's a presumption of validity unless you can meet this high standard. And they reaffirmed that in Texas, where Texas again was challenged based upon racial grounds, and they reaffirmed it, saying under Alexander, saying, we told you in Alexander, we're reaffirming this, that if you're going to challenge on racial grounds, you have a high bar to meet, and that so long as there is not a blatantly violative act done by the legislature, we're going to presume it valid unless there's some other grounds that you could find. So the important thing here is that that with regard to the lawsuit going on in the Supreme Court of Virginia, the sole challenge is based upon procedural grounds under the state constitution and state laws, saying in order for you to bring this referendum forward, you have to meet certain hurdles. And I'm not going to belabor all the different hurdles, but it's that the referendum has to be passed by two separate houses. And the way that that's been read is that it has to go through two separate legislations. Like it needs to go through legislation, one, and then the next election after that. So you have to have an intervening election. There wasn't an intervening election here. And so they're saying that based upon that, even though it passed both houses and was approved, there was an intervening election. That they're also saying that the way that the referendum was presented and approved wasn't valid. And the most important thing is they're saying that the way that the question was presented, where the ballot question specifically was, should the Constitution of Virginia be amended to allow the General Assembly to temporarily adopt new congressional districts to restore fairness in the upcoming elections while ensuring Virginia's standard redistricting process resumes for all future redistricting after the 2030 census. And so what they're saying is that the key phrase here is to restore fairness. What does that mean? What does restore fairness mean? Rob and I as attorneys could discuss this, and our definitions, even though we may agree, our definitions of fairness may completely be different. And having gone through and done and set up referendums as a elected official before, you have to be very specific and lay out in no uncertain terms what it allows and what it's going to do. And so the challenge, and what Judge Tazewell did in this, is saying that's basically void for vagueness. You didn't specify what it means, so therefore that's what's going to happen. So, Lou, what the hell does that all mean? You said a lot of words. You said a lot of words real quickly. And so what does it mean? It means hold on to your seats, because this is one where, as we both said in the very beginning, gerrymandering for political gains in order to ensure that your party stays in power should never be allowed. It happens, but it shouldn't be. And that shouldn't be part of the system. And the way that this would swing, it would have a significant change in how the elected officials and the congressional delegates would be elected within the state of Virginia. And that would cause significant shift, could cause significant power shift, which would significantly affect the way that the United States will go forward.
And even, anytime that you intentionally, and I mean you meaning politicians, anytime politicians intentionally take steps to disenfranchise any group, I don't care whether it's based upon party, religion, sex, whatever, you are doing a disservice, and as far as I'm concerned, should be patently illegal, but I don't make all the rules. Because as we all know, it's all whimsical. Virginia right now has a Democratic governor, Democratic Senate, Democratic House of Representatives, or their what is akin to their House of Representatives. 5 years from now, 6 years from now, maybe it turns 180 degrees and the Republicans say, well, what's good for you is now good for me. Guess what? We're going to screw you and we're going to turn it around. And then they get all pissed. And it's just a back and forth. Let people vote. Right now, the Commonwealth, as we said, it's purple, and it's the way that they vote is representative of who they are. And Democrats aren't disenfranchised. Republicans aren't disenfranchised. Let the people vote and make the decisions. But if you try to artificially put your finger on the scales, I don't care what situation it is, it never ends well.
Right. So that's lose gerrymandering 101. Yeah,
Nice job.
So, yep. And then we're also going to discuss briefly, if you want to cover it, or if you want to hold off till next month, the FISA. Do you want to cover that?
I'll do something very, very briefly about the FISA. So, for people who know, FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which was originally put into place in 1978, I believe. It created a special legal system within the legal system. And you're like, people you hear in the movies about the Star Chamber and all this other stuff. There is kind of like that thing. There's FISA courts, which are not covered. They're not public. They're all sealed. And it's supposed to be for foreign surveillance, for national security. So for that kind of level of concern, the Congress put into place this FISA statute, which needs to be reviewed intermittently. And I'll just leave it to say that it's due to be reconsidered. There was a vote, I think, last week, and they weren't able to pass it to keep it going because there's a concern. You're skirting the Fourth Amendment. It's the Fourth Amendment, as we talked about in prior episodes. Go look at the Facebook page, because we went through all the stuff in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The Fourth Amendment guarantees someone that the government can't just go through your stuff. They can't just go through when they want to willy-nilly. They can't detain you. They can't search your house. They can't search your papers and effects without probable cause. And there's usually a warrant, depending on the jurisdiction. They call different names. Say the prosecuting authority, and Lou can speak to this more as a former prosecutor. We think that Joe Blow is cooking meth in his basement. We have a couple of people who report that they smell this, they see him do this, they see him selling weird things at, odd hours. There's an informant over here that says he bought something from this guy. So with all those facts, they bring it to a judge or a magistrate who reviews it independently and will determine if it reaches a certain level of saying you have probable cause to go and then search. So you have to seek permission. Well, FISA, it's not about that. FISA is about basically the government going to a magistrate in a FISA court and saying, we need to do this, this, and this. And well, what happens with the information that they get? At least in state courts or in federal courts for criminal proceedings, the information that's gathered is focused on the prosecution of this case. In this case, Joe Blow cooking meth in his basement. Whereas in a FISA warrant, they're gathering information, phone records, bank records, eating habits. They'll follow people. What if they're American citizens involved in this stuff? Where does that data go? Who's using that data? How do they do this kind of stuff? And there's a lot to tease out here. But there are many, many senators and representatives who are really now skeptical about FISA's gone too far. People have heard in the news, well, wait a minute, how did you get my, the Biden administration went to go get phone records of
15 representatives.
Right. And I read somewhere that might have been under FISA, might not have been under FISA, but there's a heightened sense of what the hell's going on with this stuff. So it's going to come up for another vote, I believe, on April 30th. We're taping this on the 28th. So in the May docket, we'll get into whether they approved the extension of FISA, and we'll really get into what FISA is, what it's going to do, because there's some talk about how they're going to modify FISA in order to get the votes in order to get it extended, if they're able to do it.
Right. So there you go. There's FISA. So now we go on to the judiciary. So there's nothing been going on in the judiciary, has there? Jesus.
Yeah, there's always something percolating. And we've said it before. If you're in Washington, D.C., and the Supreme Court is in session, do yourself the favor.
Go
Go.
sit.
Please
Right.
go. It's open to the public. Obviously, if there are some significantly politically charged cases, they only have so many seats in the courtroom. But go. Understand what the court does, how it works. It's fascinating. And I understand. You're like, Rob, you're just a lawyer. Of course it's fascinating to you. The manner with which that they go about doing legal arguments, you see some of the very finest legal minds in the country, which is the way it should be. Both Lou and I we were sworn in as members of the Supreme Court bar.
And we'll be doing a broadcast from there at some point in time. We're planning on, doing a field trip one of these days to actually sit in on a Supreme Court argument and broadcast from the Supreme Court. So
It
anyway,
might be the October term, but yeah, it's in the books. It's in the works to do. But I can speak for the time that I was sworn in, and I sat there and I watched the oral arguments go. The razor sharp wit of the justices and the manner with which these attorneys are able to deal with and turn around arguments and think on their feet and on the fly come up with it really is interesting. So for anyone interested in just the civics of this country, how things work.
Just picture trying to argue with your 16-year-old kid on why they didn't do their homework and everything else, and how many excuses they come up with and how quick they are on their feet. Well, yeah, that's just that on crack, But that's my easiest way to put it.
There you go. That's nice. But the big deal, and there are a couple of different things that came out of the Supreme Court this month, but the one thing that we don't have a decision yet, but it was in the news quite a bit before the arguments were made. The day of the arguments, it was all over every news outlet, every news feed, every internet stuff, social media, and for weeks after is the issue of birthright citizenship. And birthright citizenship has been kind of the understood, this is what we do just because if you're born in this country, therefore, when you're born in this country, you're a U.S. citizen. With the onset of a heightened scrutiny about illegal immigration, and there's allegations about people run over the border so they can, have their child born here in the States, and therefore how you can't split us up, and my child's an American citizen, you can't deport me, whatever. With the heightened scrutiny about that issue about illegal immigration, this has now become a hot button topic, which had never been before. President Trump
just to build it. I mean, and so you were talking about the one issue, but then you also have one which, if you listen to the arguments, the court also addressed as well, is about some of these birthing, programs where people fly over from overseas while they're pregnant, just have their child here born in the United States so that they could have a link to the United States and eventually try and claim citizenship. And that's coming from Europe, China, India, all like a bunch of other countries. So although while we're focusing and like much of the focus is on the southern border, this is across the border, and this deals with everybody. So that's what the issue is here.
Right.
Sorry, didn't mean.
No.
And
I appreciate
LJ,
it.
we're drinking. So,
and for that, here's to you. So good. Anyway, So the issue of birthright citizenship comes up. President Trump, on his first day of office, signs an executive order basically saying, if you are born of an illegal alien or illegal aliens, you're not here legally, you don't automatically get birthright citizenship. Everyone goes berserk, da-da-da. Long story short, it goes into the courts, it goes up, and finally gets argued in April of 2026. And you might say, well, what's the big deal about all this stuff? It's settled law, right? Well, I thought so too. And I admitted as much to Lou off camera. I said, we both went to law school. We did all this stuff. We did constitutional law. We did all this stuff, and it never came up as an issue. And
was
it was
done deal.
always just assumed because you'd hear about, oh, well, if you're born in this country, of course you have to be a citizen. Well, we now have an issue. And so I started to dive into it. And it's not as cut and dry as you think. I'd go into it with an open mind saying, okay, let's see what it is. So you start with the language of the 14th Amendment, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of, that's the key, that phrase, but we'll get into it in a minute. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. And it goes on for a little bit, but that's the gist. That's the language. And the people who are pro birthright citizenship, they say, I don't know how much more clear that can be. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Bingo, done. It's been the law of the land for as long as we can remember. And it was actually, they say, when I say they, I'm not saying that I'm with them or not. I'm just saying the people who are on the side of the argument saying in favor of birthright citizenship. This issue, they say, was challenged and already settled in 1898. And I also said to Lou off camera, I said, when we were in law school, we'd get these cases from 1800s in the United States Supreme Court. There'd be 5 pages, 10 pages tops. So when I went to go look at this case, which is United States versus Wong Kim Ark, cited at 160, volume 169, United States Reporter, page 649 in 1898, it is voluminous.
We'll have a link for it in the.
I didn't like that very much. Anyway,
Yeah.
and I read the case, and this case came out only 30 years after the 14th Amendment was ratified. So it was still pretty fresh in people's minds in the government. And the Supreme Court goes on to talk about the common law of England and how, if you're born under the sovereignty of a certain jurisdiction, and therefore you gain rights from that jurisdiction. And they go on to talk about that under common law, that's just the case. The children, even of aliens, as they call aliens, and of course at that time aliens were referred to as just non-citizens. Doesn't mean they're illegally there or not. They could be there visiting or whatever. Under common law, the doctrine of the children, even of aliens, born in a country while the parents are resident there under the protection of the government and owing a temporary allegiance thereto, are in fact subjects by birth. So then they go beyond the common law and they start going with the analysis of the 14th Amendment and the purposes of the 14th Amendment. They go on. The 14th Amendment, as you all may know, was to codify as a constitutional amendment. So it wasn't just a statute, the 1866 Civil Rights Act, which gave freed slaves citizenship. And they wanted to make sure that it was put in the Constitution so it wasn't easily overridden as statutes can be. So ultimately, the court ruled, and it ruled, and I'm reading here, whether a child born in the United States of parents of Chinese descent, who at the time of his birth are subjects of the Emperor of China, but have permanent domicile and residence in the United States, that child becomes, at the time of his birth, a citizen of the United States, and therefore the question must be answered in the affirmative. So you're like, okay, that's pretty well easy. But you actually read the opinion, they always go through a findings of fact. In this case, Wong Kim Ark, his parents were, quote, this was said throughout the opinion, domiciled residents in the United States at the time of their son's birth. And they lived in San Francisco. And the child was born in San Francisco. Why is this important? Well, I don't, in reading the decision, there was no discussion about any illegal immigration. There wasn't any discussion about his parents not being here properly. They said, however, over and over, the parents were, quote, domiciled residents. Now, because Lou and I are lawyers, we start looking, well, what did that mean in 1898? If you look at Black's Law Dictionary.
Right. And for anybody that watched the argument or listened to the argument like both of us did, because it was fascinating, that was something that the justices focused on, like significant questioning as far as, well, what is a domicile? What, how, would they be domiciled or not? So anyway, what is it?
Black's Law Dictionary. A domicile is a person's legal home. You can have many residences. I'm taking the word for word from the dictionary here. You can have many residences, but only one domicile. And it says, more importantly, quote, for purpose of federal diversity jurisdiction, citizenship, end quote, and domicile, end quote, are synonymous. So his parents had some sort of citizenship right to live in San Francisco in California in the United States when their son was born. You look over also, as I did, the Lawrence Tribe's American Constitutional Law, which every law student will have PTSD that I'm showing this.
Dude, really?
Really, I do. It's just under 1,800 pages. But anyway, within this book, which is the treatise on American constitutional law, it says the 14th Amendment privileges and immunities clauses doesn't say anything about domicile residents, whether illegal immigration or not. They talk about over and over again, the issue at the time was about whether it's federal or state citizenship, because that went into different voting blocks and different voting interests. So really, you're left with the Black's Law Dictionary, quote, for purposes of federal diversity jurisdiction, citizenship and domicile are synonymous. So I take that and apply it to the decision in Wong Kim Ark and say, well, the judges there clearly made a statement saying that his parents were here legally. So moving to the other side of the coin then, for the people who are against birthright citizenship and are trying to support the president's executive order, we look at the language of the 14th Amendment and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that little clause. Why is it there? It's got to mean something, because people are smart who wrote the 14th Amendment. If they just meant to say that anyone born here should be citizens, they would just leave it at that. But they put in and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And they make the argument that that means that they're here legally. They're subject to the jurisdiction thereof, meaning the parents. So that's number one. And it's acknowledged that the 14th Amendment, as we said, was to make the 1866 Civil Rights Act pass as a constitutional amendment. As I was reading through these things, when you say now to the jurisdictions thereof, throughout the Wong Kim Ark decision, they also make the decision that this isn't just, yeah, of course, his parents were here. They were born, kid was born, citizen. They have exceptions. Oh, like what? Now remember, this is 1898. So we're not in the lens of 2026. In that time frame, there were exceptions, such as if a child is born of two Native Americans, they called them Indians at the time. And if they were still among the tribes that held out allegiance to the tribe and not the United States, your kid didn't get automatic citizenship. You were considered illegal, or at least not a citizen. They also talked about the same thing about ambassadors, because their allegiance was to their country. They came here to be the ambassador on behalf of England or Japan or whatever, Libya. If they have a kid while they're here, their still allegiance is to their country because they're ambassadors. And your kid, says the Supreme Court, doesn't get automatic citizenship. So you translate that to today's issue, it would seem to fit into the argument of, wait a minute, well, if you're not here legally, why is your kid going to get automatic citizenship? And why would you reward people who broke the law to get here to get citizenship therein? So the question, I think, is going to come down to whether or not the United States Supreme Court is going to latch onto that distinction, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, meaning if they really look at Wong Kim Ark's parents as domiciled residents, quote unquote, that's a significant thing. If they choose to overlook it, I don't know. I mean, I listened through some of the arguments. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I read accounts from different news outlets because I always try to triangulate my news because people want you to believe certain things and how they report it. It seems like the court is relatively divided on it, and it's going to be interesting to hear how they decipher and go through all of this. There's a lot more here I could go through, but I'm not going to give you, 100-page thing. But that's Birthright Citizenship, which probably will be released, I would imagine, prior to the October term when they come back.
Right.
But who knows?
Yeah. I mean, and it's, for people, it sounds like, oh, you're splitting hairs. Well, that's the law. That, the law and the courts and the attorneys are all about splitting hairs and about looking at what is meant in the specific legal definition. I mean, the other thing is that you have to take a look at is that when this was written, they had just, as Rob and I discussed beforehand, that everyone's talking about like, well, it was written for slaves, and it was written like, the 14th Amendment was basically to ensure that the slaves had rights as citizens of the United States. Well, take a look at this, where that's a completely different situation, where you now have people that were, for all intents and purposes, involuntarily brought here and are now living here, as opposed to people that are coming in of their own volition and avoiding and skirting immigration rules. So it's, and again, we're keeping this as apolitical as possible, but we're looking at it from, splitting the legal hairs. It's not as clear cut as either one of us thought. I mean, when we were first discussing about having this as part of the episode, we were both like, okay, well, it'll be something quick.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you start taking a look at it like you do with anything. And the deeper you dig, the more you find out, and the more you're like, holy crap, this isn't as clear as I thought. So anyway.
And so we're going to keep an eye on it. Obviously, whenever the decision comes out, it's going to be covered in the monthly docket. There are a number of other cases that have come up to be argued in the Supreme Court, which will be part of the coming dockets.
Right.
There's one in particular about, you mentioned it before.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just a quick blurb about this, which is one where, again, being a former prosecutor and being involved in this stuff, is the Supreme Court just took up arguments on geofence warrants. For anyone that doesn't know, and I'll give quick down and dirty on it. What's a geofence warrant? Well, a geofence warrant is where before, when you would used to look for a location for somebody with a cell phone, that you would be able to triangulate based upon cell towers and like the arc of the cell tower and everything else. There's a whole mathematical equation to it. When I first began as a prosecutor, we used to use them all the time, and it was a new thing back in Jesus, 5. Oh my god! And so we would start using that, and
Were
that
there
was a
cell
novice
phones
idea.
then?
Yeah, where that was a novice idea and doing the triangulations. And what would happen is that with the triangulation, you would get down at most times, maybe, especially when you first began, maybe within a mile area.
Mm.
Then it got down to being like, wait, maybe within a quarter mile. And that's about the best that you could really get. You really couldn't get any specific information. For geofence warrants, what geofence warrants are is that for anybody that has a cell phone, these horrible devices that we have, they track everything that you do. They are something that is your personal biographer. And if I get a hold of it, I could track back to where you were 10 years ago if I wanted to. By running certain apps, crap, the Bruins just scored. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
1-1 for anyone that's keeping
But there's
track.
still time on the clock.
Yes. So that threw me off. With the geofence warrant, what can happen now is that if you have any certain apps like Waze, Apple Maps, Google Maps, anything, that even though you may shut off your location tracking, they'll still track you by the way that certain ads pop up and certain things happen. So I could go for a geofence warrant and ask for this information, and based upon the data that we get, and it's a multi-step process. It's anonymized. I'm not going to get in all that, but there's a whole process by which you get it. But if I get this data and crunch it, I can narrow down where you were to probably within 5 to 10 feet of your exact location, which, for cases that I've done when we've had people charged with sexual assault, murder cases, that was huge. In Connecticut, a geofence warrant was was a whole decision on a homicide case. So it's significant. Now, going back to the FISA warrants like we were talking about before, I can see where there's certain, right to privacy issues and concerns about, about what information law enforcement can get. So it'll be interesting to see. Again, this was just argued, so it's going to be something that's going to be decided later on the term, and we'll have that as another episode of the monthly docket. But just something that I geeked out about, so I wanted to talk about it. So
Well done.
because it's all about me.
And really,
So anyway, so 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 where does it leave us now, Rob?
well,
So
we've covered the executive, legislative, and judicial. And at this point, if this were a trial, judge would look
Closing
out and
statement.
say, "Counsel, you have a closing statement." And we do.
Yes, we do.
Lou?
So, in all seriousness, because I mean, we often make light of a lot of different things, but as we said when we on our very first podcast, the very first time that we did this was just shortly after the murder of Charlie Kirk, and we discussed how the reason behind us getting on and doing this podcast is to promote dialogue and to promote discussion and be able to, like, I don't care if you agree with me, it's a matter of being able to voice your opinions freely and based upon fact and based upon rational decisions and rational arguments, not just because I don't like, Orange Man bad or, Sleepy Joe was this or whatever. I don't care about the politics. It's a matter of being able to discuss issues and not demonize one another. Well, we've come back to that, and we're back to demonizing one another. And when you have politicians using on both sides, but mainly on one side, because I'm not a what if or like, what about person, what about this? It's coming a lot from one side. And you can disagree with what you want, but when you demonize the other side and really every time that you say, this is the end of democracy. Well, no, it's not. And it's not going to be. It's just, you don't like what's going on. So the more that you do that, the more you demonize somebody, the more that you encourage stuff like this to happen. Period. End of story. Because you have people out there that listen to you. Just like Rob and I are very, very particular in what we say and how we phrase certain things. May not always seem it all the time, but we do, because we know that, people can listen to us and it could change opinions and it could sway certain people. And we want to be very careful about what we say. Some people aren't like that. Some people don't care. And it's a lot of politicians out there saying a lot of rhetoric that just foster division and foster hatred and foster violence. And to have polls coming out saying that people are beginning to accept political violence more and more as acceptable, that's unacceptable. So anyway, Rob, I know you have strong feelings about this as well. So I want, let's hear your closing statement.
The fact that political violence is now being normalized is sickening. Period. Things that Lou said, spot on. We started this channel not only because we love our country and we want people to understand it, because education seems to have been failing in many respects, because you really can't appreciate something unless you know it and understand it completely. But also to continue the dialogue, to continue to relay that this country was founded upon dialogue and compromise and discussion. And now I took off the top of my head, and there may be more. I made a list just in the past I did 10 years. Got 2017 congressional baseball game shooting where Representative Steve Scalise almost lost his life. 22, the assassination attempt of Brett Kavanaugh, which led into continued and a second basically attempt after the Dobbs v. Jackson, which dealt with the abortion issue, was leaked, which there was a reason why it was leaked, was to stoke all this stuff. Protests at the homes of all the justices who were shown to have signed off on this decision. By the way, it's illegal and it's against the federal statute, but the then Department of Justice didn't do anything, just let it go, which if you don't nip it in the bud, if there aren't consequences, because this is a country it's a rule of law. If you don't have laws that have consequences, it's just going to fester and get worse. And it wound up where someone wound up at Justice Kavanaugh's house, mapped to his house, plans to do stuff, ropes, weapons, and he admitted to, now he's serving, I forget what time, in a federal prison for attempted assassination of a Supreme Court justice. 2024, Luigi Mangione. You can think whatever you want about our lovely healthcare system, and I say lovely in quotes, but that you've normalized the fact that you're going to support someone who shoots the CEO in cold blood on a city street. And anytime he comes for an arraignment or any sort of pretrial hearing, they're fawning over him, all this other stuff. It's sickening. The 2024 Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt of President Trump killed a bystander. No one talks about that. But yet, so many people are like, oh, too bad he missed. You should have gone and you should have had more training and da-da-da. 2024, a Florida golf course, another attempted assassin is found. 2025, Antifa shootings at ICE facilities in Texas and Illinois, I believe. Here this past weekend, 2025, in April, at the Correspondents' Dinner with the President, another assassination attempt. Of course, in September of 25, Charlie Kirk. Spring of 2025, all the Tesla violence, because here, the creator of Tesla, he was here with Doge and he was trying to expose fraud. Well, first, aside from the whole, why wouldn't you want to make sure your money is actually whatever? The whole point that he was aligned with Orange Man and therefore he must be bad too. So they start firebombing the Tesla dealerships. They go after people who own Teslas. Countless dealers are beset upon, owners wanting damage, da-da-da.
And don't
It
forget
goes
the
on and on and on.
Minnesota.
In June of
Yeah.
2025, shootings of the Minnesota state lawmakers. I think, if I'm not, I believe the last I saw that the guy who went and went to their houses, shot both of these a representative and a state senator and their spouses at their homes, was pissed off because they didn't see eye to eye as he did on the issue of abortion.
Right.
So now it's okay to kill them. In April of 2025, the Pennsylvania governor's mansion was set on by an arsonist because the governor of Pennsylvania is Jewish. It was the first night of Passover, and this guy was this pro-Palestinian, blah, blah, blah. Again, political violence is being normalized, and it is not right. I didn't even get into things about the BLM riots in the summer of 2020, the anti-ICE riots in 25, and the Chaz Chop Seattle bit. It goes on and on and on. And what disturbs me today, on Saturday, when there was this attempt on the president's life, that day, Hakeem Jeffries, who is the House Minority Leader, was giving some sort of rally speech to his caucus or whatever, and he had a big poster board next to the podium which said maximum warfare all the time. Now, for months, at least since the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt, there were a lot of calls like, everyone keep the temperature down, which only goes for like a news cycle and then people forget it, they start again. But when a reporter asked Hakeem Jeffries yesterday, it was either yesterday or today, it was Sunday or Monday, I forget. Well, don't you think that, this statement you're making is horrible? What he said during his little press conference with the poster board, he says, we are in an era of maximum warfare everywhere all the time. And when he's questioned about it yesterday or today, his quote, as I read today, was, you can continue to criticize me for it. I don't give a damn about your criticism. Really? You're the House Minority Leader. You're not some backbencher, whatever, first term person in a state legislature no one will ever hear about. After another attempted assassination attempt, I don't care if you have a D or an R after your name. Lewis, talked about his political affiliation. I'm an independent. I've always been a registered independent, just so we're clear. But this sickens me. And when you had the New York Times this past weekend, within the past couple of days, have a podcast and give love to this guy, Hassan Piker, who has said he's already called for the murder of Republicans and capitalists, quote, murder those MFers in the street, let the streets soak in their red capitalist blood. And it continues on to this time now that he's advocating for a, quote, micro theft from any corporation that you don't like because they deserve it. And, to legitimize the assault up to murder, depending on who it is. We got to do better. got to do better. The Republic starts and ends with the 3 words of the Constitution that begin it. We the people.
People.
Not those people, not my people. It's we the people. We can disagree all we want. We can have discussions, and we should. But to normalize violence is an enormous problem. And for the love of God, I hope that we're able to come out of it and actually have the nerve and the moral fortitude to shun those people who would beget that kind of political violence, who would stoke it, who live off that stuff. These parasites on social media.
Well said, brother. Well said. So we appreciate you listening to the rants. Again, this is going to be our closing statements. This will be our section going on forward. So this is where, if there's any rants you want to hear about, this is the time to add in your comments, like, share, and subscribe. But give us your comments. Give us your feedback. This is your show as much as ours. We're adjusting and adapting it to meet what you want us to present you. We can't do this without you.
Right.
We try and take on serious matters with a little humor, a little history, a little law, but we also take serious matters very seriously when called for, and this is one of those. With that being said, I believe that brings us to the end of the monthly docket. So
for April of 2026, in the books. Let's do better for May of 2026.
So let's put April 2026 behind us. And we'll look forward to the next month with you. Please keep tuning in. We love the comments. We love the feedback. And again, this is Republic. If you can keep it podcast.
If you can keep it.
Hoorah. Cheers, brother.
Cheers, my brother.
Shut up and sit down.
Thanks for listening to the Republic, If You Can Keep It podcast. Join Rob and Lou in our next episode as we continue our riveting discussions on the most important topics affecting our great republic. Drop a line for topics you want to discuss, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time.